Please bear with us just for 30 seconds while we connect our other viewers on Facebook Live. Hopefully we're now connected on both Zoom and Facebook. So I'd like to welcome everybody to this second in our series of World Horse Welfare winter webinars. And in this particular one, we're going to focus on the influence on peer pressure on how we manage our horses. What we've been doing at our webinars is inviting experts and members of World Horse Welfare team to share their experience of particular topics. This evening, and I will introduce them more fully in a moment, but we introduce Pippa Funnell, who is of course one of our most well-known event riders, Gill Keegan, a lifelong rider who's currently studying for MSc, and Jordan Headspeath, who has worked at World Horse Welfare Farm Belwade up in Scotland. What we want this to be is a two-way conversation, so please do use the question and answers on Zoom or on Facebook. Please put comments in the comment page and ask questions to share your views. We really want people to be involved. So anyone watching on Facebook, please do share the live video. All webinars will be available on the YouTube channel after each event. As far as questions are concerned, for the Zoom audience, please use the question and answer tab at the bottom of the screen. And the Facebook Live audience, again, use the comments section. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please ask others, talk to others and share it with your friends. And you can find all about our previous webinar, other webinars on the YouTube channel. We also welcome ideas for future topics. And you can let us know on chat or email at education@worldhorsewelfare.org. In the winter webinar series, we are running webinars every second Wednesday. And our next webinar will be on how to provide good foot care for sound and lame horses. That's on December the 1st with Simon Curtis, an internationally recognised farrier who has worked in Newmarket for more than 40 years. We'll place a link in the chat to sign up. Now, this is going to be a different format from the last few webinars. Not least, you've got me hosting it. Previously, we've had Roly O as the Chief Executive. I'm Tony Tyler, the Deputy Chief Executive. Roly is currently away talking about World Horse Welfare's work to the FEI. We want it to be a three-way discussion with Pippa, Gill and Jordan exploring the influence of peer pressure, both good and bad, on how we care for our horses. And then after we've explored it a bit there, we'll open it up for questions and we'll ask our panel for as many as we can get in the time. And now I'm just going to try and share my screen with you so that you can see our slides. This is when my mouse stops working. So, how to resist peer pressure and what's right for your horse. Peer pressure is something that we all feel, whether we like it or not. And our panelists today are going to explore that topic. Just before we move on to talking to the panelists, though, what we like to do is hear from you. Please do post in the comments where you're from, but we're also going to now share a little poll. And what we're going to ask you is, how has peer pressure ever led you to change or how you manage or ride your horse? The options are yes, peer pressure changed what I do in a way that was detrimental to my horse. Yes, peer pressure changed what I do in a way that was beneficial to my horse. Peer pressure has sometimes been beneficial and sometimes detrimental to my horse, or no, peer pressure has never influenced the way I managed or ride my horse. Please remember that your answers are completely anonymous, and these polls are just to give us and you a taste of everybody else's experiences. While you're voting, I'll just share a little bit about World Horse Welfare in case you don't know us. So, World Horse Welfare was founded in 1927 by an amazing lady called Ada Cole. We work on ways to improve the horse-human partnership, and we really believe that horses and humans work well together. We believe in the responsible use of horses in sport, and we work with the regulators in those sports to try and ensure that welfare is maintained. We're the largest rescue and rehoming charity in Britain, with 4 centres across the UK. But we also work in 16 countries abroad. We provide care, we promote research, we shape laws, and we try and raise welfare standards through education. The aim of these webinars is to focus on a number of topics to support owners and riders. And today's webinar is all about the effect of peer pressure on us on equine care. Among other topics, we will cover whose opinion actually matters to the horse, what techniques owners can deal with peer pressure, the role of interpersonal relationships and communications when dealing with peer pressure. And this actually echoes the theme of our annual conference, which was held just last week in London, with the title of Whose Opinion Matters. The conference involved a range of experienced and high-profile speakers and is available to watch online, and we will pop a link in the chat. But before moving on to the panel, I hope that I've got poll results about to come up. So, as you can see on your screen, the one that seems to have come out at top has peer pressure has sometimes beneficial and sometimes been negative to my horse. And as you can see, the different answers there, but it's interesting to see that 59% of you have felt those effects of peer pressure in the past. So now I'm just going to move on and introduce our panel properly. First of all, I'd like to introduce Pippa Funnell. Pippa is a great friend of the charity. She's been a charity trustee. She's had a 30-year career at the top of eventing. She was the first winner of the Rolex Grand Slam of eventing. And along with other many medals and titles, she's well known as an equestrian who really cares about her horses. Next, we have Gill Keegan. Gill is a lawyer. She's ridden and owned horses in the UK, Australia, and the USA. She has a diploma in equine science, and she's currently studying for an MSc. And finally, we have one of our own staff, although Jordan has sadly shortly left us to work on her family farm. Jordan joined the team at World Horse Welfare's Belwade farm in Aberdeenshire in 2018. She's got a wealth of experience of caring for horses and ponies of all shapes and sizes, and she has previously worked for Her Majesty the Queen, a stud groom at her Highland pony stud on Balmoral estate. She also breeds her own Highland ponies. So, just to start the discussion off now, what I'm going to do is ask each of our presenters to just give a very short their thoughts on how they have been affected by peer pressure in the past, how they've dealt with the situation that they've encountered it, and whether they think it was right or not. So Pippa, can I move to you first of all, please?
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me and joining on this webinar. So peer pressure, gosh, within the equestrian industry, I think so many of us are subjected to peer pressure in so many different ways. And even myself, over 30 years in the sport, I think I'm still affected by peer pressure. I think within the sport itself, and from looking at a very competitive angle, I think it's very easy to be affected by peer pressure and find that you know, it's a competitive world out there, and I think it's very important not to be too focused on what other competitors are doing and how competitively they're riding. For example, say this spring, even myself, you know, at the one-day events, there were people often riding for the result and being competitive, which is, for sure, it's about your horse, and it's knowing your horse, knowing your training, knowing when the right time it is to ride it in a competitive way and at the level you're at. And I, for one, with my horses, tend to use, for instance, the one-day events within the eventing world as the training ground for the bigger goal, which is the 3-day event. So it's very important that, yes, you might have to think, I've got to find out whether my horse can run faster, and I'm going to do that on suitable ground, but I'm not going to run it faster because everyone else is running it fast, you know. And it's not saying other people are wrong, but it's all about knowing your horse, knowing when the right time is to step up a level or run it quicker, or whether the ground's suitable. It's not being led by just what everyone else is doing, because everyone else's situation is different and their training might be different, and what's right for them isn't necessarily right for you and your horse. And I think that applies at all levels, from juniors to young riders to kids to even my level. So that's the competitive angle.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pippa. And I think that really is a key thing, that just because it's the right thing for you doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for somebody else, and the right thing for somebody else is not necessarily the right thing for you. Jordan, can you give us an example, please?
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Absolutely delighted to be in. I came under fire online. The peer pressure I recently, this year, experienced happened via social media. I uploaded a video in February this year of my Highland pony mare Nessie ploughing her way through some very deep snowdrifts. We had a pretty horrific winter up here where I live in Aberdeenshire, and my ponies live out all year round with a windbreak, and when the weather's terrible they have ad lib hay. Being Highland ponies, they are perfectly designed to live out all year round. However, I uploaded this video. Nessie had decided to take herself off for a walk on a lovely sunny day, and I took this video just as I was walking back up the field to meet her. Basil, if you could play the video, that would be fab. So yes, in February, I uploaded that short video and never thought anything of it. However, in the morning when I checked my comment section, there was lots of positive comments, but unfortunately a lot of negative comments from people telling me how cruel and horrendous I was, asking why I would turn my pony out in these conditions. And although I know I'm doing the best thing for my pony, Nessie is absolutely fine. It still sowed the seed of self-doubt in my mind. And I did start worrying, you know, should I have picked a livery yard that had stables available? Should I be keeping her inside? And yeah, the self-doubt indeed crept in. So, you know, there was a lot of people that were very concerned as to why you would keep a pony out in these conditions, and perhaps forgot that she is a Highland pony designed to withstand the conditions of Scotland. So it did make me have a rethink about, you know, what to upload to your social media.
Thank you, Jordan. And yes, of course, people express opinions from all parts of the country, indeed all parts of the world, on social media, and they don't necessarily know your individual situation or the breeding of your pony, etc. And you certainly experience that side of things. And Gill, a situation that you've dealt with, please.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for inviting me to chat with you today. It's brilliant to be on a panel like this. I'm really excited about it. So we're currently in the US, but as a family, we spent the last 3 years in India, and there I rode on quite a large yard. I was coming at my riding from a completely different perspective to the other people there. So we had many grooms who were paid to exercise horses. And by exercise, I mean, they were expected to get on, walk, trot and canter for half an hour, and then put the horse back in the stable. My riding, so I'm a mum, I'm busy, I want a relationship with my horse, and I'm not particularly a competitive rider, but I take my riding really seriously from a relationship building perspective. And I had a young thoroughbred there who was recently off the track, so I would get him out. Well, the grooms, it was very different there. So grooms would get him out and hand him to me, and I would go over to the mounting block and say to him, you know, Boosie, are you okay with me getting on today? And sometimes Boosie would say, yes, that's absolutely fine. And when I say that, he obviously couldn't speak, but from his body language, he was relaxed. He was perfectly happy for me to get on. And then we might go for a walk, a trot and canter and pop over some small fences. Other days I would come to the mounting block and say, Boosie, are you okay for me to get on? And he would say, absolutely not. We are not doing this today. So I'd say, okay, we'll train here until you are ready for me to get on. And sometimes that meant that I might get on in 10 minutes. Sometimes that meant that we'd train at the mounting block for half an hour, and then we'd go for a little walk, and he'd go back and have his day out. In India, labor is very cheap, so there are many people around to help you. And people thought, so I went and said, oh, when I arrived at the yard, I said, I've been riding for 30 years. People looked at me as a rider that's been riding for 30 years who couldn't actually mount her horse and just had no concept of doing any form of groundwork or training at the mounting block. So the pressure, I'd be standing at the mounting block and I had people running over to me to help me to get on, a really worried and distressed animal. And the pressure I felt just to get on and ride anyway was quite extreme. So yeah, that's my scenario.
Thank you, Gill. And I think the scenarios that we've been given there by each of you do very clearly show that peer pressure is something that we all have to deal with. Now, please do keep putting questions into the Q&A part on Zoom, please, or on Facebook. On the Zoom panel, you can vote questions, and what we'll try and do is see whose questions are most popular as we come in, and I'll work through those. But we've got a few questions just to start off with. Sorry, the one thing I should say as well, it's great to see people joining from literally all over the world. We have everything from Western-super-Mare to New Zealand at the moment, so it's really lovely to see you all tuning in. Thank you very much. So the first question that I've got for you, and I think I'm going to start with Gill here. Would you say that peer pressure is ever a good thing?
I'd have to say absolutely it's a great thing too. So we've traveled a lot as a family. We own quite a large piece of land in Australia that we ran as an equestrian property. And I don't know if anybody listening has ever moved we were classed as, I suppose, city folk into a small farming area. It is not for the faint-hearted. So to set yourself up as running a piece of land around people who have lived in the area for many, many years and know what they're doing has its challenges. But so I had to reach out to people. I had never owned and managed land before, and I had never run horses on my own property. Things like, I'm very, very welfare oriented. When our property has a large dam, I thought it would be brilliant for my horses to have access to the dam all year round. So when it got hot, they could go and paddle and drink freely. And our neighbour pointed out to me that whilst it created a very nice picture, the horses in the end, we had 5 or 6 horses having access to the dam, would probably ruin the banks of our dam. And then I decided that in the best interests of all the horses' welfare, it would probably better long term that they had something to drink and not run our dam dry. So that completely changed my my welfare focus was changed, but all through really good peer pressure actually.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. Certainly if peer pressure is pointing you in the right direction, that's got to be good. How about you, Pippa? Anything on how do you think about, can it be a good thing for somebody competing at your level?
I think absolutely. I think it can be a very, very good thing, but I think it's knowing and following the right peers that promote good management, good horsemanship skills. I mean, there are people within the equestrian world that would be a little bit more, they would win at all costs. To me, absolutely, the horses are not machines. And so I think, for sure, I think advice you can get, and I think it's great to be open-minded. It's great to use your eyes and to watch people, because, you know, we all can see if horses, I mean, hopefully most of us can see if a horse is happy, relaxed, content, and enjoying its job, sort of thing. And I think, to me, I think seek advice, but it's seeking advice from the right people, or watching the right people, following the right people, and using those. I think they could, you know, I'd like to you know, blow up the system I use, because I absolutely believe in it, but I know you can be misled very easily by someone that might be winning a lot, but maybe has a very different outlook in the management side or the way it's done. But I think, you know, peer pressure for sure. I think for the younger riders looking up to, I mean, I can use a name. I mean, Piggy March, you know, someone, I think she's a peer that people should look to, because she's a great horsewoman and absolutely does right by the horses, and their needs come first.
So I think you've probably covered off what was going to be most of my next question, which was going to come to you, Pippa. But I was going to ask, do you have advice specifically for owners who are faced with conflicting opinions from their peers versus a vet or an allied professional?
Well, I think, of course, you know, you need to always listen to a vet. You do, you know, the vet at the end of the day is fully qualified. That's why we turn to the vets. But there are also situations where, again, and I'll probably keep coming across this theme time and time throughout this chat, that it's still about knowing your horse, knowing the history of the horse. Because, you know, if you suddenly present your horse with an issue to the vet, you know, it might have, if it's got a fiddle leg, it might always have puffy legs, or it might always be, do you know what I mean? That the things you should, you know, we should know and learn. Every one of us should know, get to know our horses as individuals, not just their physical side and how their legs feel, but also their mental side and how they are like that. So you know when something's wrong. But I think, for sure, the first thing, you seek advice from the vet. But I think if you have a friend, you know, whether it's a friend in the yard or a manager in a yard, if you're keeping your horse at livery, that you actually look up to and know they've got a wealth of experience. I will often discuss with the young riders I'm involved with and mentoring, I'll often discuss veterinary issues and personal experiences I've had. And I think sometimes, I think it is worth getting a second opinion, and that second opinion might not just be from another vet, it might be from someone that you think, actually, I think they've been through a similar thing before. I wonder what advice they could give. But normally it comes down to if a horse is injured and it's a veterinary issue, all I could say, you're safer to give the long rehab and not be in a hurry to get horses back too quick.
Absolutely. Jordan, obviously, with the example that you gave of your horse out in the snow, we're often influenced by others on their opinions on what we should spend our money on with horses. And I'm sure one or two opinions that came through there were talking about stables and shelters and rugs and those sorts of things. We just wondered, in your opinion, what should you be spending your money on?
Right, with this one, Tony, I'm going to go right back to basics and highlight the 5 freedoms framework, which is globally recognised as a gold standard in animal welfare. So very quickly, they are the freedom from hunger and thirst, the freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury and disease, freedom to express normal behaviour, and freedom from fear and distress. And I say these because I believe that they are the priority. That's what you should be spending your money on before you're looking at any fancy tack or any fancy clothing or any fancy rugs. your horse has got to have adequate, you know, adequate facilities. You've got to have the correct safe environment for it to live in, whether that be your own field, whether you're at a livery yard. It's got to be safe for your horse. So yeah, environment number one, definitely. Quality feeding, which is the correct type of feeding for your horse or pony, depending on how much work he or she is in. Correct and suitable bedding if your horse is stabled, and good quality forage, all up there. The next thing I'd like to say is, I think farrier is up there. Your horse's feet are so important, because with no foot you get no horse. Like, that is the base of everything. So before you even think about, that's the very basic, you know, for me. Moving on, I know it can sometimes be a little bit of a tricky discussion, but we're lucky to insure all of our ponies. Even if you maybe don't want to risk, you know, investing money in an insurance company, having an account there for a rainy day is, I think, vitally important, because at some point with horses things do go wrong and big vet bills can spring up very, very quickly. Before moving on to having your correctly fitting tack. But I do think it's a very tricky one for especially the younger generation, because as you all know, with being on social media, you are plagued with adverts from all these different companies that are constantly trying to get money out of you. You know, if you're going and looking at, you know, one numna, you've suddenly got 10 adverts for 10 different numnas. And I think it's, very difficult to get caught in the trap of buying the latest gadget or the in-colour numna, for instance, rather than getting your horse's teeth checked or paying insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. I've certainly seen a lot of matchy going on in some of the yards that I go to, which as opposed to perhaps other priorities. Gill or Pippa, would you like to chip in at all there? Because I know that people have strong opinions on that.
Well, I think it was definitely a good one to also mention the teeth in there, because I'm astounded, and that's something that's very easy to learn to feel whether your horse needs its teeth doing, but it can affect them hugely, both eating wise and when you're riding them. And so many people I sort of say when I'm teaching, you know, have you had your horse's teeth checked? And it's amazing actually how few do get them regularly checked. But I absolutely agree with everything Jordan said, and it brings me just briefly back, you know, talking about safe environment. When I was little growing up, my pony was literally kept in the back of a log shed, tiny little stable, and no, it wasn't flashy, but it was absolutely safe. The stable, the bedding was clean and dry, and loved it to bits, and it wasn't about the money.
Thanks, Pippa. And I can add there that, so I was brought up in Yorkshire. I'm a Yorkshire woman, brought up by a very, very Yorkshire father. And I think, Jordan, I think people from Yorkshire and Scottish people are renowned for being very careful about where we spend our money. I hate spending money, I'll be open, I hate it. But I think as long as I make sure everything is completely up to date with my horses. So I hate spending money until then I go into a tack shop and then something very weird happens to my brain. And I think it's something to do with the smell. I think they pump some sort of human pheromone into tack shops that make me lose all sense of reality and just want to buy things. But having said that, so everything, I think, making sure that my horse's health and welfare goes without saying. But I've got a pair of nice long leather brown riding boots that I absolutely love, and I love the investment that I made in those. Makes me feel really good as a rider and really good when I go onto a yard. So I think that investment in me, even though it was sort of, I suppose, unnecessary, makes a huge deal to how I feel when I go and present myself as a rider. So yeah, that was a good investment to me too.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. Certainly how you feel sat on board on top of the horse can make a difference, can't it? Now, I've got a question here that I know that you're all interested in, but before I just move on to that one, it's great to see so many questions coming in on the chat. Please, those of you putting questions in and reading the questions that are coming in on the chat, do upvote them, because once I go through the ones that we've pre-set up ready for our panelists, then I will go to those questions that have been upvoted to begin with straight after that. So the next one I'm going to talk about a little bit, or ask you guys to talk about, is anthropomorphism, which I'm just very pleased I just managed to say that word. Normally I fail abysmally. But in-person and social media discussions about horses are often full of anthropomorphism. And to what extent do you think that's a problem in equine care? And if I start with you, Gill, on that one.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. So I think there's been a lot of studies showing how anthropomorphism, so that's giving human characteristics to horses when we talk about horses, can be quite damaging. And I see that especially when we're not really understanding the human-horse relationship or understanding how horses are presenting themselves in our world. So when you see a horse that's scared or confused, they're often labeled as crazy or angry horses or evil or not nice. I think that's really, really harmful to animals. However, I think if you try and talk about horses without without using any form of anthropomorphic language, it's actually really challenging. And as humans, we use language to explain and make sense of things. So to some extent, I think we do have to use some form of anthropomorphism to get our point across. But it's if we do that with a notion of how our horse actually feels, and we're reflecting that in the way that we can understand it, then I think that's not a bad thing, especially when we're talking to people that may not necessarily understand horses as well as we might. I also think it gives the horse a sense of agency. So we're recognizing that horse is actually an actor within the relationship, that they have a part to play, they have thoughts and they have feelings. So in some ways, I think it can be quite helpful. It's not always a completely negative thing.
Pippa, I know this is a topic that you're interested in as well.
Well, I think, I hold up my hand and I absolutely admit that I talk to my horses as if they're humans. I do. I'm a bit crazy like that. And I think it's easy because to me, it's so much about forming that partnership and relationship. But I think we naturally tend to think that horses think like we think, but I actually don't think they do, even though they absolutely, they can sense the care and the love. I'm sure they can sense that. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure my horses know me and recognize that. But I think there is an element where if we're not careful, we think that horses think and feel like humans, but they don't. And I think, when horses, exactly going back to Jordan and the horse in the snow, it's easy for people, particularly if they're not knowledgeable. You get cold weather and you think, oh gosh, and I'm like that because especially at this time of year, a few weeks ago, my event horses, I'm an old-fashioned believer, the horses have a proper holiday. And a few weeks ago, it was a wet and windy night, and I was lying in bed thinking, oh, my poor horses, they're out in the wind and the rain, imagining how I would feel out in the wind and the rain. And I went there the next morning and they're absolutely as happy as Larry, and it's very easy to think, and same thing with horses in stables, people can think, well, poor horse, it's stood in a stable 24/7. But the key thing is that it's well managed, well looked after, well cared for, well exercised. But they don't think like humans as much as we think they do. And yes, I treat mine as if they are humans and talk to them as though they are. But I think we have to remember they are horses.
And Jordan, you've probably, with your example, as Pippa just said, felt the effects of anthropomorphism more than many.
Yes, I think when anthropomorphism is directed towards our horses, it sometimes gives them an unrealistic model to live up to. But absolutely, in the native pony world, we're seeing that I'm seeing more and more and more and more of overweight horses. And I am the first person to walk out my door when it's raining and think, oh, the ponies are as cold as I am, and oh, they must be a bit hungry, and oh, I must feed them more. That is my instant reaction. And my mother, I have to say, is you know, horrendous for this. As soon as it starts raining, she's worrying about putting rugs on them. She's saying how cold it is. But just to highlight another quick story that actually happened this week is that the estate where we live has got a gamekeeper, and he went out one evening with it's just a heat gun, so it can see in the dark and it picks up heat. And my 5 ponies were the glowing orbs. They could be, there was nothing in the glen that was warmer on this freezing cold night than these 5 ponies. And he actually came up to me and said, you know, unbelievable how much heat that those ponies generate. You know, they're lighting up the glen for miles in this camera. So yeah, they don't feel the cold like we do. And yeah, I think that it can be a good and a bad thing for equine welfare.
That's great, thank you. Certainly, many of the calls that we receive at World Horse Welfare through our welfare line, the callers will say, well, how would you like it if you were out in that field or you were in such and such a place? And we do spend a lot of our time explaining to them situations which are suitable for horses. Equally, there are obviously, sadly, many reports of situations that are not suitable, and it's trying to get that balance just right. So moving on to how we deal with peer pressure now. Pippa, as an owner, how do you find the confidence and resilience to resist peer pressure and do the right thing by your horse? You're muted, Pippa.
Apologies, muted. Sorry. I was just saying that it still comes back to actually knowing your horse well and having the confidence. And I think it's so similar, all the answers, because it's seeking the right advice if you're not sure. And there's so much out there. And yes, as we were saying, that can be confusing if you're not in the know. And that's where I think it's so invaluable that if people are uncertain, that they ask the experts. And that's, for instance, that's something you can advise at World Horse Welfare, you know, and people are very approachable. But I think people that I want to say, oh, is that a dangerous thing to say about common sense? You know, I think I'd like to think people do know, you know, if their horses needs more weight on it or needs more condition, or it's got too much on. And if they're not sure, yes, they need to get advice. But I think it's being confident enough to sort of, if you really, your gut feeling says you're right and someone else you feel actually no, whether they're wrong or whether you think, no, actually that's not me, or that won't suit me and my horse, then have the confidence to stick to what you believe in or your gut instinct. But at the same time, you know, there are things, you'd be open-minded, because there are things we can all learn. And that's what I always try to think of, particularly not so much to do with management, but you know, I am still open-minded. If someone who I respect and admire has tried something new and I think, well, actually that could really help my horse, I might just try that. Or even if someone suggests riding a bit differently, I thought, well, I'll give that a go, and if it doesn't work, then no. So I think it's, yeah, trying to be confident and knowing your horse.
And Gill, do you think scientific evidence can help with that? Obviously, you've done quite a few academic studies now. How do we feel that the written side of things can help?
I felt that's helped me really sort of give me a tether when I'm faced with peer pressure. So if I've just got something to back me up, it helps you. I don't want to say justify what you're doing, because I don't think as owners, you know, as legal owners of an animal, you're required to justify. But I think when you're in groups of people, sometimes you feel compelled to justify your position. So if I've been in conversation with people, I'm never trying to educate at them as to why I'm doing a particular thing, but it makes me feel really a lot more comfortable about showing my actions in front of people. For example, in India, as I progressed in my diploma, I felt much more comfortable about riding and training in front of people because I was comfortable that I was doing the right thing by my horse.
Great, thank you. Jordan, we certainly at yards see the peer pressure that individuals put on each other. How do you feel that owners can actually support each other in doing the right thing by their horses when there is peer pressure to do something different?
I think very simply, you can offer so much support by just being an ally, just being a friend to somebody, not necessarily giving your opinion or judgment on the situation that they're in, but just being a sounding board, I think can be really helpful. There's, you know, sharing experiences with each other, because you never know what people have been through in the past, and their strength in numbers. I think, you know, talking about it is very beneficial.
And certainly one of the things that we've experienced at the charity, and I'm sure to some extent you'll have come across dealing with owners up at Belwade Farm, Jordan, is in the sad situation when a horse is coming towards the end of its life. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think you just have to, there's been several situations where you've been in, and sometimes when somebody's in an incredibly emotional situation and stuff's happening with them, just you being there and listening and not, you know, saying any conflicting opinions. Sometimes people don't want your opinion, they just want to be able to vent their emotion. And if you can sit there with a cup of tea and just hear somebody out, you know what, you might just make their day.
Absolutely. Another one for Gill here. Some owners assume without evidence that they're being judged negatively when in fact they're not. How can we help them or help ourselves to realise that the problem is one of perception?
I think that's a really interesting one. I think especially when when you see a lot of debates online, I think people automatically assume that everybody thinks the worst of them because, you know, people online can be so brutal. I've got probably another example from India. So like I said, I really thought that everyone there thought I was unhinged and slightly crazy, and that I couldn't get on my horse. After a few months there, I'd had some lessons. I worked with one of the instructors there, and again in my lessons, I used to think that he thought I was crazy because I'd question what he told me, and I'd have an open dialogue with him. I wouldn't just do everything that he asked, and I'd think about how my horse thought and felt about what we were doing, which he wasn't used to people sort of factoring into lessons. Anyway, the same guy, he came up to me after a few months and said, "Oh, can I just ask what course are you doing?" And so I told him, and he's like, "Oh, it's really nice to work with someone who's thought a lot about what they're doing and seems to know a bit. You know, it's very rare that they got people there." And in the end, he didn't sign up for the diploma in equitation science, but he ended up signing up for a master's in equine science. So. Yeah, I thought they were crazy, but I was actually in my own little way making a difference there, which is amazing.
And Pippa, have you ever found this has affected you? Because you ride in front of thousands of people, and sometimes you must question how people feel about how you're riding on the day.
Well, I think when I'm riding in front of a lot of my peers, I think they take, I don't even acknowledge them and I think they think, "Oh, she's a right miserable old cow riding around," and it's because I'm so focused on because to me, I really struggle to ride unless I'm absolutely thinking and feeling what's going on. So people can talk to me and I don't even notice that they've said hello. So my mind is in that zone, because for me to do the best possible job on my horses, it's about thinking, feeling, and being one step ahead. And I loved what was being said then about the riding lessons, because when I teach, my lessons seem to go on forever because I spend so much time trying to teach the guys who are riding about understanding the horse and understanding and listening to, you know, what the horse. And I was so lucky because I was trained by such an amazing lady, Ruth McMullen, and her whole ethos was all about the rider, and if the rider works on themselves, you know, it will help their horses. And so, you know, when I have to ride in front of a lot of people, yeah, for sure, I think it is hugely important. And I say this the whole time to my young riders that I'm mentoring and training, that it is absolutely so important to always conduct themselves, you know, absolutely in the correct way with their horses. And we say this to our team at home. We've got a large team, and it's, listen, we've all been there, haven't we, when your horse, and I gave our lot before we went to Hickstead show, we had 35 horses at Hickstead, and I said to some of our guys that help on the ground, I said, listen, you know, no matter what happens, if a young horse just knocks you, just, you know, you be very careful, you know, yes, you might have to say stand still, but then you reward it absolutely the whole time. And that's what I absolutely believe in with the horses, that at all times your heart rate stays the same, and patience, and yes, you know, hopefully I try to absolutely do the right thing by my horses, and I want people to see that. And that's when it's tough if things go wrong, because sometimes things can go wrong and it can look differently from what it feels, and that's where you have to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely can, but you know, people are obviously always trying to do the right thing, and it reminds me of a quote, an old riding master who I forget the name now, but they said something along the lines of that to ride and to control a horse, you must first learn to control your emotions. And actually being able to do that both at home and in public is so important.
There's a lovely quote too, just that I love to work on your horse and your horse will get better. Work on yourself and all your horses will get better. Yeah, absolutely. Do please keep these questions coming in on the chat. I can see quite a few being upvoted now. I've just got a couple of questions left for our panelists, and then I'll move on to those ones on the chat. So thank you for putting those in, but do keep putting them in, please. I'll send another one to Jordan now. What advice would you have for owners who are unable to care for their horse the way they want to because of the yard setup or the rules on the yard?
I think I've been in this situation before, and it's very difficult to talk it out with people, but communicating exactly what your needs are, what your horse's needs are to your yard owners and management is crucial. It can be a very daunting conversation. It can be a very difficult one, not a lot, you know, it can be a bit confrontational at times, but at the end of the day, you know, your horse's welfare is the most important thing. And if you can't, you know, look after your animal the way that you feel that you need to, then unfortunately it might be time to look at a different yard in your area if you're able to do that. I actually had this situation happen to me earlier this year when one of my ponies very annoyingly came down with a very mild laminitis, and the yard that I kept her on didn't have anywhere to get her off the grass, and I needed to get her off the grass. Luckily, I'm was in a very privileged position. I could move her to a yard just down the road that had some stables as a temporary measure, just till I got the situation under control. But I think always in these situations, communication is key, and depending on how the livery is set up, if there's a group of you, then you could maybe work something out together and come to a compromise.
Great, thank you. Pippa or Gill, do you have anything to add on that?
Oh, well, all I would say is that, you know, it's easy also to get very set in your ways, isn't there? Because I was thinking then, listening to Jordan then, you know, I know our system and our routine at home. And if someone did come and for example, if someone came and kept a horse here and said, my horse gets fed 4 times a day, and I do know that the vets, you know, people say you should feed little and often, and I hold up my hand and say my horses are fed twice a day, which is completely wrong. But because that is the system we've always had, because we were always in a big yard. So, you know, if I had a livery coming in and they insisted on their horses being fed 4 times a day, I'd have 30 horses kicking the door down. So I would actually have to say, well, and again in a diplomatic way and communicating way, say, listen, can we just try it, sort of thing. And so there has to be an element of compromise, but again, you know, there are different systems that can work, but it's still, the main thing is the welfare of your horse, that it's getting its needs.
I really like that viewpoint, Pippa, and I think it's got to work for everybody involved. So a lot of yards are like little ecosystems, and I think having been around lots and lots of different livery yards, you sort of have to learn a whole new way that's based on similar principles, but everybody's got their own ways of doing things. And I'd almost feel like on one side, if you know when you're at a yard, you're paying for a service, so I think it's good to have a certain amount of expectations, but on the other side, I think you've got to be really respectful over the yard owner and how things run. I'd almost prepare, I mean, as a lawyer, I sort of prepare for a lot of conversations, or maybe difficult conversations I'd have in advance, but I'd almost prepare as though I was going to a mediation if I was going to have that conversation. So what is going to benefit? Could I sort of chunk my request down to something that's going to impact both parties in a really effective way? So I might want my horse feeding 4 times a day, but could I pay extra for that? Would be a simplest thing. Could I move my horse somewhere that the others aren't going to see it? Could I make it a benefit for everybody? And I think I'd be ready to sort of counter any problems that are likely to come up with my request. And again, like you said, Jordan, you know, if it's a no-go for either of you, then that's when I think you either deal with the discomfort or you start looking for somewhere else.
Great, thank you. Yes, and Gill, this is a similar sort of question in a way, and indeed parts of it, because we do slightly go round in circles when it comes to peer pressure. But do you have any advice for owners who have less money to spend on their horses than their peers, and who feel as if they're not looking after their horse as well as a consequence?
I think I'd have to say that horses, they don't understand currency and they don't understand dollar signs. And provided that they're free from hunger, thirst, they're able to live a life as a horse should, then how much more can you give? You know, you don't need fancy rugs. I think you need to love your horse, and you need to make sure you're doing everything for your horse's welfare as best you can. And I think a degree of honesty is there. As I say, you don't need all the fancy things. It is possible to look after horses in a really budget friendly way, but at the same time, if I know a lot of people would put food in their horse's stable before they would put food on their own table, and is that the right way to go about it? I don't know. So I think that you have to have a certain degree of honesty. If in paying for all your horse's needs means that you can't actually look after your own needs, then that's a really difficult question to ask, you know, to answer for yourself. But I think don't feel like you need to keep up with everyone else. And if keeping up with everyone else, it's causing you problems and you're not enjoying your horse, then think about moving somewhere else where people are, you know, similar to you.
Yeah, very tricky. Pippa or Jordan?
Yeah, I'll just say that you don't need the most expensive shampoo. People can buy the most expensive shampoo, but not wash the dirty areas on a horse that get sweaty. You know, they can have expensive boots. Same thing if the horse is left with, you know, they can get boot rubs under expensive boots. They'd be better off without boots sometimes. You know, it's again, it comes down to management. You know, if you've got a body brush and a curry comb or a dandy brush, you can. It doesn't cost a lot to buy a couple of brushes, and it's the elbow grease that's often put into it rather than the price of the product to get them like that. It's to me, it's often about the elbow grease and good old work that gets your horse looking good.
No, I couldn't agree more. World Horse Welfare, we've got over 2,000 horses out now in loving homes, and actually seeing the variance in those homes. We have all different levels of income, but obviously we make sure that the horses are well looked after. But some of the people are operating on a budget, and they manage to do it so well. So sorry, Jordan.
To butt in to do a quick plug for the World Horse Welfare second-hand tack shops, which are fantastic. You can get some mega bargains. So there are ways that you can cut costs and still get amazing stuff. Please check them out.
Absolutely, Jordan. That's a very good plug. That happens at each of our centres.
Likewise, if you have a clipped horse, actually the duvets at Tesco's are much cheaper than these great big thick Whitney blankets.
Sure.
They can very cheap ones.
Just thinking before I move on to the open questions, just thinking a little bit about interpersonal relations and communications, because we've talked about how peer pressure might affect you, but obviously there are times when you will perhaps put peer pressure on each other and on others. And I just wonder, perhaps to start with Jordan on this one, if you as an owner see poor horse care on a yard, for example, an overweight horse, what do you think is the best way of broaching the problem constructively with the owner?
Oh, tricky question, Tony. I think you always have to be extremely mindful of how, where, and why you're expressing your opinion. I think do your research properly. And I would tread very, very carefully to begin with, because it's very easy to have your good intentions misconstrued, if that makes sense. So always a quiet word between the two of you, away from other people, definitely not online. And yes, I would just tread very carefully. Ask, first things first, is everything okay? And take considerable time to think on how you're going to ask these questions. Obviously, if there is an actual welfare issue, the last resort would to be anonymously, which you can do, contact a welfare or field officer to come in, because that's sometimes very good, rather than you getting involved, especially if it's a tight-knit livery yard where things can get messy, is to just have somebody completely from the outside the situation come in. But obviously be very careful with those sorts of situations.
And any thoughts from you, Pippa, because I'm sure you've come across one or two situations.
Well, I mean, fair play to you, Jordan, because I would have to probably hold up my hand, and I'd probably be a bit blunter, really. I'd probably go straight in and I'd just go straight in, yes, in a diplomatic way. I mean, I've had people come for lessons and I'd be straight away, I said, do you want my honest opinion? Your horse is too fat. It does not look like an event horse, or that does not look. And I, but I do read for sure. You read the people, because often if I feel it's because they actually don't know, I won't just plow in there. I will be far more diplomatic and say, have you thought about this? Or, in my opinion, possibly have you looked, whether it's if you think the horse is too thin, I'd be diplomatic, and I'd say, I'd ask what they're feeding the horse, and maybe suggest trying something different or whatever, so you get into an experience and a discussion over it. But if I sense the person, if it's someone I know, or I sense that, because sometimes it is people I know, and I'll say, bloody hell, that's fat. What are you up to? You're not giving it enough work or something, or too much feed, not enough work. So, I would be probably a bit blunter, but at the same time, with some people, I think, no, I've got to be diplomatic. But if I feel something is wrong, or I'm a little concerned that horse is, then I will go about it in the way that my gut feeling says I should.
And certainly we see some situations where horses have gained weight over a period of time, and the owners quite simply haven't realised that they're gaining weight. They love the horses. Unfortunately, in some cases, we do see them love them to death as such.
I love that, Pippa, that I think you have absolutely earned your right to be blunt. You're in the position where you are allowed to be blunt, I think. But the fact that you say you do exercise some diplomacy, I think makes you stand out from the crowd in terms of a lot of equestrians going into yards with people who are, you know, are professional riders can sometimes be a very petrifying experience. So yeah, thank you for your diplomacy, I would say, from everybody you deal with.
I would probably say one thing that when people come into our yard is that they're probably the first thing they think is how normal my husband and I are. You know, we both are absolutely down to earth and normal and absolutely relate to everyone else, you know. So just because we've done what we've done, it doesn't mean, you know, we started, you know, it was, as I said earlier, you know, my pony was kept in the back of a log shed, and so I've worked, you know, I was that mad kid with a hairy pony kept in the field.
And Pippa, talking about normal people, one of the things that you do that a lot of normal people do is of course use social media, and I know that you have your own Facebook site, etc. How do you think it's best for all of us, both owners and industry professionals, to use social media constructively for the good of the horse?
Well, listen, I'm not, yes, I do use social media, but I wouldn't say I'm that particularly experienced. I mean, it makes me incredibly nervous, and I think there are huge positives with social media, and probably if anyone goes onto my public page, I mean, basically, if I've got something negative to say or something, or an opinion that is a bit negative, I don't bring it into social media at all. And I would not say about, you know, if I think badly of someone, it wouldn't go onto social media. Or if I thought someone rode a horse in a way I disagree with, it wouldn't go onto social media. You know, I tried to, well, I never put anything negative onto social media, and it's interesting. I know with what I put on, I find it fascinating. You put all this stuff on, and the one thing that seems to get the biggest hits on social media is it's a picture of me on the ground looking up at a horse having sort of got covered in mud, and that seems to get more hits, the things that go wrong. And again, that's what people relate to, and I still think that's a positive thing. Yes, it's not a good thing that I've fallen off, but it's a positive thing to show that we you know, we all have bad days, we all fall off, and yes, you've got to keep a smile on your face, and you know, it's no 99.9% of the time I've fallen off, it's because something I've done, not the horse. So, but yeah, I think social media is a huge thing, and I will do everything to try and promote. And going on to just briefly touching on, you know, sponsors and that side, because it's very important. You know, I'm very lucky to have some very good companies that support me. But that in itself, you know, I know there are people that would use a product just because they're, you know, they've been given that product. But I'm very fortunate, whether it's the horse feed, Allen and Page. My horses have been fed Allen and Page, which is a Norfolk company, since I was at Ruth McMullen when I was 17 years old. And so I think longevity is something that's very important. I think, you know, and hopefully, you know, if I want people to, yes, if I use something, I'm not using it because I've been given it. I'm using it because that is what I feel really works for me, whether it's a piece of tack or whether it's a feed or a pair of gloves, whatever. You know, I absolutely, with social media, if I have a product, to me, I'm prepared to promote the product, but I won't have products I don't believe in. I won't use them.
No, sure. And just a final question for Gill before I move on to the open questions. How do you think we can best use education to reduce negative peer pressure and support owners who want to do the right thing by their horse?
I think education is a great way to actually start conversations. I don't see it as something that people who are educated need to spread that. It's more, it impacts your own actions. And I think by giving us just access to better quality conversations and being able to ask better quality questions, I think that's impacted my my education so far. It's just, yeah, given me access to lots of nuance and probably many more questions than I have answers. But yeah, but just giving me chances to have to be able to have better discussions with a view to horse health, welfare, and rider health and welfare has been great.
Sure, that's great, thank you. And thank you to everybody that's putting questions in. Please do keep them coming in. I'm going to move on to the questions that have come up via Zoom and via Facebook now, and to those that have been upvoted to start off with. And the first one I've got, which relates very much to the last question we had there, was is a question for Jordan. And Jordan, do you think that a social media storm of criticism like the one you experienced about your Highland pony can be turned into an opportunity to educate the people who are being critical about what horses really need? And if so, how should we do this?
Absolutely. I think through every, you know, all of these experiences, I have learned a massive lesson after what happened after I uploaded that video. And I think it is by having these chats, having these events, more and more and more, you see these groups on Facebook or Instagram that are, you know, people that come on asking for opinion. And I think you just need to be very prepared that if you're going onto social media and asking for opinions, then you're going to probably get some that you're not maybe going to like, and just being prepared for that. But there's always a lesson to be learned and positives to be taken away.
Great, thank you. Pippa or Gill, do you have any thoughts on that?
Gill?
Sorry, just dealing with an errant 2-year-old at my end. So the question was about social media storms? Yes. And an opportunity to educate. So I think the best thing about a social media storm is it brings something to light. And if you can turn that into debates where both parties learn something, then that's amazing. But you've got to be really careful and you've got to protect yourself. A lot of times, online discussions are really harmful, unsafe places to be. So be in a position where you know you can keep your own mental health safe, and then engage on that basis. And I think, again, you're not trying to educate at people. You have to do it in a way where you can see, you meet people where they're at and learn from them too. So if you both come out having learned something, if everybody comes out having learned something from the debate, I think that's a great thing.
Thank you.
I do think that's where social media has, I mean, with these webinars, for example, and I'm getting involved with a masterclass that Lucinda Green's doing with cross country, and it is nowadays it's a massive opportunity for people to, you know, you don't have to travel the world to get advice now. It can be so beneficial, some of the things that does go on social media, relearning.
Great, thank you. Do keep your questions coming in, everybody. Another one now, I think this one probably for Pippa. I've recently returned to horses after a long break and have been astounded at the explosion of products on offer now. I know I struggle to keep up with the products on offer. I find the choice almost immobilizing. How do the panel cut through the marketing and plugging by influencers to get to the good advice and products?
It's like if you go into Tesco's, I mean, God, how many types of biscuits are there? I mean, it's crazy, this one. And you think, you know, why? But I would say if you're talking about, you know, I shouldn't say with all these additives and everything, I mean, I shouldn't say it, but, you know, good quality food, actually, a lot of the additives you don't need. And that's where, again, yes, it's who the influencer is, isn't it? And that goes slightly back to what I was just discussing just a minute ago with whether it's a product or a type of saddle or whatever, you know, what people you're taught. I think, you know, who are the influencers? Are they experienced people that have got proven record and you can see that their horses are obviously very well and well kept, and they look in great condition. And so you can then think, well, actually, maybe that might work, you know, that they're standing by that product, then there is something in it. Because I definitely wouldn't be one to promote a product if I really didn't believe in the product. And that's where, again, it's trusting your influencer, isn't it? Does that make sense?
I totally, I would say that makes sense. And it's looking at the motivations of your influencer, isn't it? You know, if the person that's influencing really genuinely has horse welfare at heart and is trying to improve what you do, then that's one thing. But if they're trying to sell a product, and as you say, there are certain supplements and things like that you may query, then that's a different matter. One for Gill here. What advice can you give on how to stay out of the judgment of others, or horses' decisions and disciplines, when our emotional attachment and love of horses shows out being judgmental? How can we help ourselves and each others recognise our judgment can harm others? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so hi Lisa, I love a good Lisa Ashton question. She asks the most beautiful and brilliant questions that make us all think very hard. Is there a radio show or a TV show, or there's a movement at the moment where people can turn up and meet complete strangers and learn about their life stories and come away from that. So they sit and talk. It's a bit like speed dating, but you're not doing it for a relationship. You're doing it just to learn. And I think that's absolutely amazing. So if we can view, you know, I've never had any experience of Western riding. Some things don't make any sense at all to me. And I'm sure Western riders would also think this crazy woman who can't get on their horses also, she doesn't make sense to me either. But to sit in a room and to understand where they're coming from, and I can tell them where I'm coming from and see what we've got in common and discuss areas where we're different, I think would be amazing. So in that sense, I think, yeah, keeping out of judgment and understanding what we can learn from each other, I think, yeah, what more could you ask for? We're all singing from I hope we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We all love horses. So
great, thank you. Any of Pippa or Jordan, do you have any further thoughts on the judgment of others?
Well, I think it's being, you know, it's being open-minded too, isn't it? You know, you can judge, you know, you can. Well, it's a difficult question, actually, if I'm honest with you. Maybe I shouldn't go into it. Jordan, help.
Yes, I was just thinking that it's an extensive one for sure. I think you always have to be mindful whenever you're passing judgment, is you never know what is going on with somebody. You never know what's happening behind the scenes, and also sometimes just taking a step back, especially if you're, you know, on livery yards, they can be the horse world can be an incredibly competitive place. You know, you're constantly judging yourself, labeling, comparing, criticizing. I think scientifically it's called the negative bias. So I think, yeah, you need to take an investigative approach, and yeah, don't let your thoughts turn into actions.
Thank you. I think the
question.
I think the judgment of others really can be an interesting thing, because it's sometimes based on such a tiny moment in time. We see the reactions, particularly across social media again, of snapshot pictures that are taken of people, some of which are truly horrific and need something doing about, and others it's just literally one moment in time, and if you see the full picture, then you see a lot more, and it's very difficult to not be judgmental at times.
Yeah, that's a really good point there, what you've just said, because I had a long time ago talking about could have easily been judged wrong, because I was doing a mission to Athens where they followed me camera for a year running up to the Athens Olympics, and we had a situation where he was filming to home, and we were loose jumping one, and it chipped in and poles went everywhere, and we put the fence right back afterwards. And I said, if you film this, I said, you've got to show, if you just put on just a clip of the horse having poles going everywhere and missing, it had no rider on it, was being loose scored, I said, that will be all wrong because people will take it completely the wrong way. I said, you've got to show how we went about afterwards, putting a little fence down, building up, and how happy and confident the horse was. So things, exactly what you said, and on social media and clips, things can so be taken out of the wrong way because people don't. It's like a bit like Jordan's pony. If that video of it in deep snow, eventually you come to a place on the video, if you filmed it long enough, where it would be absolutely happy, So it's not that the snow went deeper and deeper and deeper. So people have to see sometimes the full story, and that's the thing with social media. Exactly what you said. You just see the wrong clip at the wrong time.
That's it. And social media has such a spread. Tens of thousands of people sometimes pick up on these moments at times, and that can have a very long-lasting effect on the individual, can't it?
Yeah.
I've got another one for Jordan here that's been upvoted. I think it's actually very similar to one that we had up earlier. But Jordan, how can we best avoid the pressure of buying the latest and greatest tack and feeds whilst remaining on social media?
I think you just have to be very careful what you search for. Go in, if you genuinely do need to go and buy a new numna, first things first, please check out your local second-hand tack shop before buying new. Reduce, reuse, recycle, people. And also then just be very focused on what you want. Like, these companies want to grab your attention, they want to grab your time. And let's face it, the longer you spend online looking at these adverts, the less time you spend patting your beloved pony. So get in, do your shopping, get out. My advice.
Thank you.
Very good.
The next one, I'm going to point this one to you, Pippa, again. There is evidence that many owners don't recognise when a horse is too fat, and they may criticise the owner of a horse that has good body weight, saying it's too thin. And certainly we have reports sometimes coming into World Horse Welfare of fit competition horses where people passing by actually think that it's not carrying enough weight. What advice do you have for an owner who comes under pressure to feed their horses more when in fact it is in great condition?
Well, I think people also have to remember, all horses are different. I've got, just in my yard, just my small string of event horses, you get some with a broad rib cage that can look as though they're carrying too much weight. And also you get some that are very good doers. And I think it's being very aware that you still relate it. If you're talking about competition horses, you relate it to how they're feeling in their work and the amount of work you're giving them. Because, I've had horses, that can go to a 3-day and they're 3-day fit and they might be more thoroughbred type and they just don't carry some of them don't carry as much weight. So when you get them to a big competition like badminton, they're properly fit, and that you would say, gosh, are they a bit light? They're running light, and you might be pumping all the food in that you can possibly give them, but they're not sort of carrying the same sort of condition, and yet you can get other ones that. And so it's being very aware that the feed is related to the horse and related to the amount of work, and it is. I found one thing very, very interesting a long time ago, right back in my sort of the days when I won the Grand Slam in 2003. I had a group of horses, all different sizes, and it was staggering because actually their competition weight was very, very similar, and they were all different sizes and they looked completely different. But I found it fascinating that the weight was very similar. So sometimes, it's not just about the eye and what the eye sees, it's about the feeling you get. And I know if a horse is is a bit overweight and you're thinking, oh my God, it's not fit enough. You know, it's not often related to the feed. It's related to, I need to give it a bit more work. Rather than cut the feed, I need to maybe up the work or vice versa.
Yeah, sure.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
I've been known to go off on a tangent. Keep my mouth shut. Chat too much.
One for Gill, and I think this is actually quite a hard one. Could vets and other professionals in the horse world do more to support owners when they are targeted by negative peer pressure?
It's an interesting one, because I think a lot of vets are definitely trained to treat the horse and to treat the veterinary problem, and then they've done their job and they move on. So I think it's definitely a broader element of support. I suppose setting people up with maybe a bit of a broader knowledge about the treatment that they've chosen to do, setting them up to have those conversations by giving them some knowledge. And I think as they're doing the treatment, if you're there and listen to vets, it would be great to understand their thought process. I know I hear from really great coaches who are actually talk you through exactly why they're doing things at particular times, and then why they might change their mind. Really, so you get a really good understanding of why the vets reach the opinion that they have. So I know if a vet's treating my horse, I always make sure I'm there, and I'll be actually probably quite annoying and ask lots of questions and ask to look at if a horse is being scoped. I want to look to see what the vet's seeing, and so yeah, I think maybe annoy vets to prod them to learn from them a little bit more.
I mean, I don't know what the rest of you think as well, but I think sometimes owners are reluctant to share the information that the vet has given them, which actually can back up their actions at times. We've seen incidences of that on yards in the past. Another question for Pippa here. You talked at the beginning about using one-day events as training for major competitions and not going out to win. Do you see owners putting pressure on riders to win or move the horse up through the levels when perhaps that isn't in the best interest of the horse?
Well, it's a little bit difficult because I know I've got some wonderful, wonderful owners. So the owners that I have absolutely stood by me. And yes, for sure, it's a lot easier for me now because of my experience and the experiences that I've had over the years. And you know, I sort of stick by my guns, and my owners, yeah, it gets sometimes very frustrating for them, particularly, you know, my dressage is often my stronger phase, and often the horses can be in the top 2 or 3. And this spring actually probably was a classic, just this spring, with having no badminton to aim at, and yet the you know, selection was being done for the games and for the European Championships. And in my mind, I had two nice horses, really good horses up for it, and the reason probably I wasn't first, second or third because I just wasn't quick enough cross country. So in my own is, for them it probably would have been frustrating, but it's not in my, you know, and they understand that. And I always say to them, you know, to me, you know, if I ride your horse quick, fast to win here on this ground, it won't be at badminton, or it won't be at the event you want to really go to. So I think you have to just really explain, and I think it's one of the most important things as a rider that we absolutely can't do without our owners, but it's the way we actually get them to understand that, you know, your thoughts in the best interest to get the horse to win it or to be competitive there. This is the route, and it's harder for these younger riders because, you know, and juniors when they're unproven, because yes, for sure, you know, they've got to get results to a certain degree, and it's important to still, you know, you can't just say running fast for that, but you know, you need to train as well, but it's picking the right time, the right moment, the right course, all those elements. And I think it's absolutely essential that the owner comes on the whole ride with you. by that, you know, you don't communicate through emails, you go through the discussions, you make time to have the discussions and bring the owner absolutely on board, so they know as much as you that what the best thing for their horse is. And it's not, I can assure you, it's not about winning every time, because if you ride to win every time, you're far more likely to injure your horse.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear that. Very, very, very sound advice. Jordan, should yard owners and managers take more responsibility to handle individuals who try and put pressure on others? Or should they be more open to having discussions on best practices, etc.?
I think so. I think if, again, it's usually a tricky situation, but definitely in the case if there's, you know, bullying, or if there's, you know, a certain person that's being picked on, then absolutely, I think as a manager of a yard or an owner of a yard, you have, you know, a duty of care to look after all of your liveries, ensure they're all having a lovely time, you know, coming up to their yard and enjoying their horses. For a lot of people, that's their downtime. You know, you do your work during the day and you look forward to going to the yard to see your horse and to enjoy the social aspect. So yeah, I absolutely think that that's something that you should consider if you are maybe thinking of, you know, having a small livery yard or getting into that sort of, doing that sort of thing, that is something that you'll have to be able to negotiate.
Great, thank you. Now we've just got a few minutes left. I'm just going to ask perhaps one or at the most two more questions before asking each of our panelists to sum up. Gill, somebody's made a comment here. Janice has said, isn't peer pressure a rather negative phrase? Discussion with others is useful, or can be. Do you have any comments on that thought?
Yeah, I think peer pressure, we do immediately see it as having negative connotations, and all of these things I think can come from discussions, but I think peer pressure can mean so much more than just a discussion. It can mean people, you hear many stories about horrendous livery yards particularly in the UK, where people are actively frozen out because they haven't been fitting in, or they're not seen to fit in. Discussions that say, you know, to someone who just goes enjoys their horse and, you know, doesn't ride very much, or what are you going to do with your horse today? Are you not doing anything? It's just sort of discussions that I think put pressure on. I'd be thinking about, yeah, that being actually a negative thing. But I agree, when we're looking at the concept of peer pressure as a positive thing, all my positive influences have come from having really good discussions with people.
Okay, great, thank you. I think what I'm going to do now, because we are sadly running very short of time, and thank you everybody for such interesting questions and also for the panel's discussion, is I'm just going to ask each panelist to sum up what they feel their top tip is on peer pressure. I'm going to start with Jordan this time.
A top tip on peer pressure. I know these experiences can be extremely upsetting and distressing. However, it's always the opportunity to learn. It's always the opportunity to better oneself. And, you know, there's always positives to take away.
Thank you. And Gill?
Mine would have to be getting education from really solid sources has impacted me greatly, and finding safe spaces to have good discussions on social media has been, yeah, life-changing for me, especially over COVID. So
yeah, we've all learned some interesting things over COVID, haven't we? And Pippa, a final thought from you, please.
Well, I think it's to really know your individual horse's needs, and to follow the right peers that you really feel absolutely the horse comes first, real horseman, and yeah, follow the right peers, yeah, know your horse, so that it is a very positive, the peer pressure is positive.
That's great. Thank you so much, all of you. And I think that final thing there from Pippa, the horse comes first, is what we all believe and what we all must remember, and what we must try and encourage others to do as well. So first of all, I want to thank you, all of our panelists, for a really interesting discussion tonight. We really do appreciate the time that you've given up to speak to us. And I hope that everybody has found, I'm sure that everybody will have found your discussions interesting. If I can remind people to email education@worldhorsewelfare.org any ideas for topics that they'd like to see covered at future webinars, and also that our next webinar is how to provide good foot care for sound and lame horses on December the 1st. With internationally renowned Newmarket farrier with Simon Curtis. I would put a final link up in the chat here so you can see that. And all that remains is for me to say thank you once again. We really appreciate you all coming here. You will be able to watch this webinar again on Facebook, I believe, or on YouTube. And so do have a look if you want to catch up on any of the discussion that went on. Thank you so much, Gill, Pippa and Jordan. Really very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Be kind to yourselves, be kind to your horses.